So yeah, thanks for joining. Would you like to just first introduce yourself a little bit and tell us how is biodiversity linked to your work?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. My name is Niels I'm assistant professor at social, economic and organizational psychology, and also related, like associated with the knowledge center that we have now. It's a knowledge center of psychology and economic behavior. I'm a social psychologist. My main topic, I work on social mindfulness, is like how nice are people to other ones, to each other, like in a very simple, subtle way, and how not nice it can, which is maybe even more interesting. And I guess you found me because I also teach a course in environmental psychology. And then that's also like I started doing it, and of course I started reading into the topic. So I am not a environmental psychologist by education totally, but of course I focused and I worked into the topic. So it's very nice. The question, what is biodiversity in my work, or what is it like? What's the context of biodiversity? Pretty much the same as it is for you, probably. It is part of say nature environment, but that's as far as it goes, and then we can go into the topic. But it's it comes up in my lectures, biodiversity and how important it is for the environment, but it has not a specific spot yet or place yet in psychology and environmental psychology, which maybe could or should change, but that we'll see.
Yeah, perfect. And how, so you said that biodiversity is part of your lectures. How are you including that topic of biodiversity into your lectures, and what kind of research has been, or you're probably approaching it from the psychological viewpoint?
Yeah.
What kind of research is at least or has been done and is influential at the moment, which is linking biodiversity to psychological outcomes?
Well, to first off disappoint you probably a little bit, there is very little research addressing, I'm sure you looked it up already, but there's very little research actually focusing on biodiversity. If you look at environmental psychology, this is where I'm coming from, the environment proper in the broad sense is important to psychology, and it's mainly the interaction between the person and the environment, and that's how it works. The biodiversity there is of course part of the environment, and one of the things why it could be of importance is that it has been found, and that has been researched quite extensively, that nature has a restorative effect on people, on their well-being. Like if you go for a walk in nature, you actually, it's restorative, you function better, your memory gets better, you even get more pro-social after a walk in nature. But that really is like there are two main theories. There's like stress reduction theory and attention restoration theory. But these positive effects are not focused yet on like how complex nature is or how diverse, or it's really like looked at. It's the nature in itself. I'm already telling my whole story.
Do you think then that there is a difference between the restorative effect of nature versus the restorative effect of biodiversity? Do you think there might be a link to,
that would be a hypothesis. I would have to speculate. But for example, here we're sitting in green chairs. I don't know if you can see the green here. That could remind me of green trees and already get me more relaxed to do this interview, for example. The question is if there would be a more complex nature around me, if nature is more complex, which also tends to be like attractive to people. There's also like this theory, it's called biophilia, saying that people, they like to be in nature, they like nature just because of evolutionary reasons, that they were like once long time ago, they were there, that feels comfortable to them, and that environment was rather complex, right, as you probably think are now, and that complexity might be part of this whole nature environment that drives the effect, but that's all hypothesis, right? So the complexity would be and the organization would be a point that like biodiversity could play a role in. So the hypothesis would be like that a more diverse environment, more diverse nature is more restorative, but there's no research yet, and maybe that's to come, and maybe you could help me do that research, right?
maybe we're the next generation who's going to approach that. It's good that you mentioned the biodiversity and the likability of biodiversity. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you've looked it up or if you're familiar with Bas Haring's work about the loss of biodiversity not being a disaster. That's a book we read in the course, and Bas Haring was also teaching us one lecture. Yeah. So we could argue against him, which didn't work out too well.
He won the argument.
We didn't. Yeah, he won the argument. He didn't want to. Oh, never mind. I'm not gonna gossip about Bas Haring. But what would you say? Would you agree that with his viewpoint that the loss of biodiversity per se is not a disaster, but it's a disaster that we perceive, as humans perceive as a disaster because of the likability of nature around us being diverse, for example, from the evolutionary roots that you mentioned earlier?
My answer is probably, you're not going to like it, but I'm going to say it's all a matter of perspective, really. Like, I totally agree, and from my personal viewpoint, like, the loss of biodiversity is a disaster, and I do think if we want to maintain the planet as it is, I mean, we already, as a humankind, changed it, actually, and there's research saying, like, have been changing our environment since, like, 15,000, like, 100,000 years along, so we do change our environment. The speed with which it goes right now is really, it goes fast, and we destroy things. We're not the only species doing that, but yes, we do that, but it's a bigger scale. So yes, for me personally, I think we should make sure that we don't destroy more than we're already doing. On a bigger scale, if you look more like universal scale, we're just this little speck in the universe, and if biodiversity is diminishing, is decreasing, what's the big deal, right? I can see on an abstract level, on a just as a thought experiment, like, okay, how you think, like, oh, what's the big deal, what's a disaster? The planet will survive probably, but not in the way it is right now. And there's a tension that we really have to go from, and I can see the point, and I can also see why you posit the hypothesis to actually get some reaction going and maybe get some movement going. That would not be my way, but I do respect it, I see it. It really is a matter of, like, what level you are looking. Like, for example, is humankind going to survive in the long run? Maybe not. Is the Earth going to survive in the long run? No, because in so many years, I just read it, the sun will eat us up, or like, well, something like that, right? So then everything is gone anyway. So the question is, do you want to protect it now for the next generation, for example? My answer would be yes. I have a young son, and I think, like, yes, let's protect it, right? But then again, here's psychology. That's my self-interest, right? That mixes up with the common with the general interest.
So you would say it's the self-interest, egoistic interests of each of us are competing with the common interest when it comes to preserving biodiversity and nature in general.
Yes, there is, and there's a lot of these self-interest that, like, actually, should we drive a car? Yes, I do own a car, right? But I still think biodiversity should be protected, so I try other things. So yeah, there's always, you have to weigh self-interest versus collective interest, and sometimes collective interest is connected with the self-interest, but then in the long run. And there's another thing in psychology that it's really difficult for people to think long-term. Like, short-term sometimes is easier to think of. Depends on the context, of course, and on your circumstances, how fortunate you are in life, and all of that. But yeah, so these issues do play a role, and if you want answers, solutions from me, you probably won't get them. But I'm very happy to think along and start things, and I think we should. Biodiversity is a really important thing, and that's now moving away from psychology, but like in the whole system, in the whole environment. So the less complex the environment is, everything, like, that would be a shame. Because I think that the complexity of the environment also plays a role, but again, that's a hypothesis.
All right. So you mentioned the collective interests and individual interests competing against each other. Yeah. Would you have an example of how to address address that in a better way than it is done so far? So increasing or motivating people to increase the collective interest and think less of their own egoistic interests.
Yeah. One important thing is, and that also we learned, I mean, that we should be clear about, like, if you want to change behavior, you have to make it possible to change the behavior into the behavior that you want to see, right? So the claim is like protect biodiversity, full stop, in a broad sense. That's not going to work. You have to make these goals or these little steps doable. Like if you want people to do, say for example, drive less, make sure that they are able to drive less, have more public transport, for example, or if it's about the cars, have electric cars, or so all these little steps you have to make doable and then kind of help people to make the right choice, right? So there are many things that we would like to do, but we simply cannot because, you know, then we're too busy, it's too big. I mean, I cannot save the world, I can do my little step. I recycle, but what does it help? Like all these small little things, like if you want to change behavior, make sure that people can do what they want to do and what you want them to do.
Do you have an example of one of an initiative or a project that is taking exactly like these little steps and approaching that not as a whole saving biodiversity, but...
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved a little bit in projects of greening of gardens, for example. Houses in the Netherlands, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but we tend to have like our little gardens, our big little backyards. They have all tiles and then we put pots and plants on them. It's much better for biodiversity and for climate change and everything to actually take out the tiles, have like green, surface that is is permeable. So green surface, we call it green surfaces, but it can also be set more flowers, more stuff for the bees, like that they can feed on, and more all of these things. Yet it still remains very popular, and the reasons are very complex to why people actually do that, because also they want to have room for the kids to play. They want to have not too much maintenance, and it might be too hard. They might, it might just also be that they think that's a pretty garden, for example. And biodiversity have pots from, I go from I go buy flowers every year, and I got more nice and green pots. So, what about biodiversity, right? So that's, but I mean, there you could actually, at a very small local level, you could already have some gain, cover some ground, actually.
Yeah, but then you need the people to get the motivation to do that,
yes.
and that's addressing just a lot of different people and a lot of different aspects of one thing.
And and actually right now I have students who look into maybe some emotions play a role, right? It could be very pride, be proud of your garden. You could also be guilt, could also be a part, for example, like, oh, actually, I know I should take out these tiles, but it's too much work, or I don't know how, or I don't know what to do. So these emotions could play a role. Also, just very simple things like, if I want to take out tiles, where do I leave them, right? So you have to make it possible that if they take out tiles, that, for example, the communality like Leiden, they come and collect the tiles, because you don't fit it in a car, and then you have to pay for it. So you have to make it possible. Where they have the tools, all of these things, small little things, could help people to actually make that step.
Yeah, so make action easier.
Right, doable, easier, and I don't think we usually really hammer on motivation, like people should do this, should do that, and all of that. Yes, but then also make it possible that they do what you would like them to do, really.
You mentioned different emotions that could play a role. Could you specify? You already said pride and guilt. Are there other emotions that could play a role in taking an action and really, going for a goal that is linked to biodiversity or nature preservation in general?
Yeah, not direct emotion, I would rather say. I mean, these are the two main ones that we're thinking of, but of course there might be other ones. But it really has to do, I think, more with long-term vision, like how do you see yourself and the planet and your offspring, if you have any, in the future. And I think it really has to do also, if you can change a little bit of the short-term perspective to the long-term perspective for a lot of things, that would already help. But that is really, really complex, for example. Also is connected, for example, to socioeconomic status. Like how much money do you have? Do you actually have the opportunity to do all the things you want, right? Or if you have financial stress, I really don't have time to think about biodiversity because, you know, I don't know how to pay the bill at the end of the month. So then I'm like, I'm locked off. So that all of these things, they play a role in that complex.
Yeah. If you could come up with an initiative that would work in a perfect world, what would the thing be in regard to preserving biodiversity in Leiden, for example? Let's narrow it down. Would you have an idea of an initiative? What would you wish for the common, like the group interest, and for your egoistic interest?
Yeah, no, I mean the thing is, but then I'm gonna start saying big things that I cannot really make true or make come true. Is like change the attitude. But what I just said is like it would be great if somehow we can change the long-term perspective a little bit, and then what I said, make goals doable, make them small that people actually can do it. Yeah, and again, going back to the gardens, help them take out the tiles, for example, help people and do campaigns and all of that. But also what's really important, you have to combine like the psychological interventions, like the motivation, the attitude and all of that, but also just behavioral interventions, like helping them, like what to do with the tiles. You need tools, what plants should I put in my garden, for example, how maintenance, should I take out all the weeds or not? Not everyone is a gardener, for example. So these things, I think my claim would be, yes, keep doing these campaigns, but don't wave the stick at people as in you are bad for not protecting biodiversity, what you're doing is bad, but really go into the reward direction. Like if you do that, then you protect the environment. It's better for a long-term perspective.
Yeah.
You said that making actions easier for people would help. That usually comes from a higher level, like a government, right? Yeah. If from your own perspective now, if you would set a percentage of how much is the government responsible for setting or leading an action or implementing an action versus the individual or families, or let's even say a group, an institution like the Leiden University, how would you set the percentages?
I don't think I'm going to say anything because right now you're touching on a really political science topic. Like, it's a great question, right? Because where are you? Where's responsibility? Because in essence, and I'm talking existentialism, Sartre, we all are responsible individually for what we're doing, and and of course, the collective is built up from individuals. And we always say like, oh, the government should help us. And should organize it, but of course government is also made of individuals. So I'm not going to put percentages on it. It really should be a collaboration, and it should be a combination of top-down and bottom-up. It should also be the neighbors and the neighborhood promoting it and agreeing on it. There will always be discussions, and it should also be supported top-down by the government. And again, let's not forget that the government is formed by individuals like you and I, who are in Holland elected to be in office and are gone after a certain period of time. So yeah, no, I'm not. I would say it remains a cooperation, collaboration, and the percentages, they might change per context, per situation, really. Your own garden, I'm going to say like I'm 80% responsible for my own garden. The roads, the streets, I cannot do anything about that by myself, except for driving less, for example. But there, the government takes more of responsibility. That's probably not the answer you want, but...
Oh, okay. What do you think, if you live in Leiden, what is your personal feeling of the status of biodiversity?
I think as a city of Leiden, they are doing rather well. I know the feeling there is attention For example, I don't know if you're aware of the Single Park in Leiden. Like it's a park that surrounds the whole, like the canals of the old city. And I'm also working on a project with students in the Single Park. What does it do, on pro-social behavior and on restorative potential, for example. So I think they are doing pretty well. It could always be better, of course. But I mean, what I was talking about, the initiatives of taking tiles out of the garden, we do that in collaboration with the city, with the municipality of Leiden. Yes, would you wish that things would go a bit faster? Yes, of course, because I think we're kind of reaching a point of no return. But then with all the efforts we can do and start moving things, and maybe we get to some tipping point where it actually goes in the right way and we're still on time. I mean, but that's my personal opinion, of course. Yeah, but I do think as far as cities go, that Leiden is doing rather well. Can we do better? Yeah, always. We can always do better.
How are you implementing biodiversity into your research with linking it to the social aspect as well?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm not specifically targeting biodiversity as such. I'm more targeting right now nature or natural environment as environment and the interaction with like psychological effects, like well-being, not necessarily. I know we like in preparation we talked about a little bit about mental health. That's really a different topic. I'm a social psychologist. I look into well-being, so like, you know, how rested are you? Maybe cognitive functioning. Does your memory enhance? Are you going to be a bit more pro-social? Do you feel more rested? Or you feel things like that? That I am actually addressing. I know there's some research being done. Does it actually really help in mental health? But that's terra incognita, like for now. It's a lot of research to be done. Could go either way. And then again, the question is, what is biodiversity for you? So let me return it, right? It's so easy to throw it around like, oh, biodiversity is important. But why is it important? What does it add? Why is it better to have a more complex environment than a simple environment? I mean, I have my personal answer, but I mean, these answers need to be asked and also like given. The questions need to be asked and answers need to be given by each individual, right?
A lot of studies that I also looked into that are looking specifically at biodiversity. There are also meta-studies that summarize it. That's a big problem because everybody defines it differently. So there are basically sub-aspects of biodiversity. Is it species richness? Is it richness in flora? Is it like, what exactly is it? How do we define it under like one concept?
Yeah, and then to come back to the two, I mean, I did not familiarize with Haring's argument. I just, for 2 seconds, I read the title of his book and his summary and what you told me. But I can see the argument. You really have to answer, how bad is it that, for example, some species is extinct, right? Again, I have my personal answer, but like on an abstract level, how bad is it for the environment, for what is functioning, and is it also not part of? And I'm going to be really careful because that's not what I'm not advocating to not protect biodiversity, but like it is a natural like sense that some species do get extinct and other species come in. So that's also part of the cycle. What we're doing right now, and it's again, I'm talking on personal title, is like it goes too fast. So it's really like the cycle is really cut. So we really go down and really the whole environment as such, or the whole system gets, you know, thinner and thinner. And that might be difficult then to actually really increase it to where it was before.
From which point would you say is it a disaster when it gets thinner and thinner as you describe it? When is your cutoff point?
I am not going to define what a disaster is. For me, but it would be when nature cannot restore itself anymore and not can come back to like a same level, identical level of diversity, right? That would be my answer. And whether we reach that point or not, I don't know. But do we have to take care and beware? I would say yes.
All right. Thank you very much. I think that's that's it.
My pleasure.
Right?
Very nice.
Yeah, very nice interview. A lot of insights.
Are we off record?
That's yeah.